Hey, I'm Joe Castillo. I'm an artist, and I've really been fascinated, Brian, with your insights for quite a few years now, and I sure appreciate you bringing the sharp young blade along to add some of his insights. What I would like to see if maybe you can work on, and I don't know if this is a question, but something to think about, is I love the insight about the lanyard.
Yeah.
And the fact that you trade things off. And there are other organizations that do that. How can we get a world lanyard where all of us
Right.
would wear a lanyard and have some kind of little clips, maybe the country we're from or the business we're in or whatever,
Right.
that we could exchange with people? Is there a way of doing that?
Yeah, I think it's a good question, actually, Joe. When I presented this concept to the guys here at Trilith, they immediately, as a business, jumped on it and said, we got to figure out what our lanyard is. And I thought that was a good question for businesses, is to figure out what is your lanyard that creates that social currency, right? It doesn't use another person, like, oh, it's just, let me come up and see what your pins are and I'll take your pins. Instead, it just is that thing that creates that social currency, right? And so I've been doing that too. I've been trying to figure out what is the lanyard, like what is that personal lanyard. I do think that, we've got to do the things, like I'm a big fan of Chick-fil-A. And I think one of the things that's cool about Chick-fil-A, especially even during the pandemic, was just the fact that they come to your car, right? And actually meet you at your car. So that proximity is there, right? And then they tore down the window and made it into a door in a lot of the new ones where they just come right out to your car, right? And I think that concept of I'm going to take the window that separated us and I'm going to make it into a door now is like that lanyard kind of feeling to me, of proximity and presence. That I got to be present now because it's a door and I've got to have, proximity with you. Now, I'm still talking to a lot of my Chick-fil-A friends and going, okay, well, what are you going to do now that's the lanyard to get them back into the restaurant, which is the next kind of question, of how do we get back to that proximity. So I don't know. I think maybe the principle of proximity and presence is underneath that lanyard that we have to kind of find that, if that makes sense. Yeah.
I think there might be something to it as well with, there's something about a pin lanyard at Disney that causes you to share the same reality. Like we talk about these different universes, and because you're both looking at the same pins, you are gazing at the same thing together and you're sharing the same reality. And I think sometimes about the fact that during the pandemic, we tried to sort of imitate face-to-face communication with people, like through Zoom, and we would look at them and have a personal, one-on-one conversation on Zoom. And we'd be looking at the camera, even though it was, trying to make it look like we had eye contact with them, even though we didn't.
Yeah.
And so we were trying to do face-to-face community with that. And face-to-face community and connection is really important. But I also think that side-by-side community is important too. And that can cause you to share the same universe sometimes, like when you're looking at the same thing together. And that almost makes me, I think it's a bit different than like a lanyard thing, because that's more personal. But like even going to the movie theater can be a really powerful way of connecting with other people.
Yeah.
Because you're sharing the same reality with them.
Yeah.
Rather than watching something at home on your own leisure, on your own time, whenever you want, streaming it whenever you want. Most people don't even watch the same TV shows at the same time anymore. When you go to the movie theater, you're experiencing something with a whole group of people at the same time and sharing that same reality.
Proximity.
You can't pause it. You're in proximity.
Yeah.
And sometimes that can be hard because people are annoyed by the people around them in a theater. You can't pause it and go to the bathroom and get snacks. But also I think that the limitations and hard things
creates
about
the
movie theaters,
presence.
they create presence, and they create something that really profoundly humanizes us
Oh,
and
okay.
causes us to give our attention and our presentness to something. And for someone with ADHD like me, it's really helpful to like just focus fully on something in a movie theater for that span of time. And by the end of a movie, sometimes I feel like I'm in deeper community with the people around me because I've been on this journey with them. And so I think it's a bit different than lanyards, but I would say that like, I don't know, I think it speaks to a lot of what we've talked about today. I think movie theaters can be a profound example of community and presentness and proximity.
You and I both were just like, please save our movie theaters and go back to the movies. Yeah.
Yeah.
One more question. How did you come up with a thought or discover the whole idea of the supernatural timing.
Yeah.
I thought that was really valuable. Maybe you could say a little bit more about that.
Well, it was all in the fact that, suddenly you had these events, cultural events happening right after. But even more so than that, it was just, just knowing the concept of movies being made and how they have to come together just really created that supernatural timing. So, like I said before, it would be different if we were just looking at the winner of the Oscars. Like, that's almost like asking a person, what's your favorite movie, right? But at Real, what we do is we ask people for their top 10 movies. And when we ask them for their top 10 movies, it creates this palette of films that then we can find themes in. So having that palette of these films and then knowing that there's no way in the world, like a lot of people are always going, oh, this is liberal Hollywood. Like whatever you're saying to us is just liberal Hollywood and whatever they want to, their agenda. And I'm like, no, I can show you some years where they would have never, ever in their life made their movies if they knew that it came together and said this, And so that is the nature of the thing I love that makes it supernatural is that the filmmakers are not in charge. The academies is not in charge because no way in the world could all of these films come together at such a time to speak all with, you guys saw it, all these bubbles that have 9 and 10. I would have overwhelmed you this year because there were so many 5 and 6s where there was like 5 or 6 themes where I had to just go, okay, even though half the films say this, I can't even talk about it because it is, I just have to focus on these main themes. So the fact that these movies have 10 of the movies are crying out barriers and boundaries, I go, that's supernatural,
Hi, I'm Lisa Sims,
Yes.
formerly employed with a media and entertainment company. But my question is, I was really intrigued with the chart with all the circles on it and all the different connections. And the main one that we spoke about today was around the barriers and the boundaries.
Yeah.
Was that whole idea, did it come to you in one aha moment? Was it brewing over time? Or what got you to that point?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the work I do on a regular basis is with people's top 10 movies, right? And so because I was doing it with their top 10 movies, I was sitting there seeing the supernatural insights coming out of people's movies, And I was just like, oh my gosh. And it still is to this day. I've been doing Real Experiences for about 10 years. And still we'll have someone crying over Dumb and Dumber, and we'll have someone, just majorly impacted by this insight from Anchorman or something like that just totally changes their life, And I thought, okay, well, there's all these insights coming out of this palette, that we have with their top 10. What if I did that on a macro level? What if we tried to do it with America, with whatever our top 10 is, right? And so I tried it with the box office and thought, well, it's probably the box office that's going to tell us. And the box office was like nothing, right? But then when I tried the Oscar nominees, and then when I realized, oh yeah, these are going to be more prophetic. These are not made with money, and all the things I disclaimed, I went, okay, this is going to actually say something, And that meaning that's going to come out of all these films is going to be much more potent. And then to find out that it was actually potent to the point at which it was almost foreshadowing, that became another thing that I didn't buy off on because it felt like very much like fortune telling. And I just kept going, okay. And then associating God with that and going, okay, am I comfortable saying that this is God? That was hard because I don't want to use God's name in vain, right? But then to see it be so transcendent and undeniable, I went, well, I don't think man can do this. Like this feels like it's God. And if I put myself in the idea that it's a loving God who's trying to help us be prepared to navigate our next thing, that makes sense to me. Does it make sense to you though?
Yes.
Does it?
That's excellent. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, because I always wonder, if people think this is just absolutely crazy.
I mean, I would have never thought of it had
Yeah.
you not brought it up. But then when you sit here and see the connection, especially at the end when you did the montage and all that, I mean, it was powerful. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Lisa. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hi, good afternoon. Hey, Brian.
Yeah.
Elissa, I remember when you first started, when I was moving back to Atlanta, and I was talking with your wife.
Alyssa was one of our facilitators at Real.
And it was a great experience. I don't know how many of y'all were able to come. I see your sister. I saw a few of the other ladies up here, but they're gone. But it really was a great experience. I think your son was probably just coming on. He was young, but I see how well he's doing and how you guys are co-facilitating. It's beautiful. But I would like to know, because when you talked back then about how God trying to get our attention, because I always believe in everything, right? Whether we believe in God or not, that He is trying to get our attention in everything, in culture, right? I'm in entertainment, but I'm also in mental health. I'm a therapist. And I just love the concept that no matter what our experience is, no matter what we're doing, that He's trying to get our attention. And I'm curious about, what are your thoughts about connecting with the theme, like you were saying this year, with the we, or making our we smaller?
Yeah.
Like, what kind of follow-up, or what's your vision to maybe capture or to check in to see maybe throughout the year, or just creating that type of community to see, what we've done with strangers, or what does that look like, from what you've presented?
Gosh, Alyssa, I would love that. I've often thought of that, where how can we check in on each other, or check in on this theme, like do a mid-year thing of going, well, do we see any Gen Zs being change agents, that kind of thing. But also just I love what you're saying about just like how can we keep each other accountable to these themes. The way I view them is it's like antennas that go up now for me. Like whenever it was like we need to test our devotion to be our brother and sister's keeper in 2020, it was like a radar. Everything I just lived my life with that being in front of me all the time. And I think this year, I'm putting it on tape now that I'm talking to strangers as an introvert, like I have to be accountable to this now, because I feel like this is what God's wanting us to do, is break through these relational barriers. And so for me, I don't know if I can create a community where we keep each other accountable. I'd love that. But I do think that we in this room, and whoever's listening to this, can get our antennas up and expect. And I guarantee you, you're gonna see it play out in a way that you didn't expect. That's the way it happens to me. It's not going to be the way that I think this barriers and boundaries is not going to be the way I think it is. Like, it's not going to maybe need devices or whatever. It's probably going to be some other ownership that we have or something like that. Does that make sense? So I think it's more of just having your antennas up, and I think it's also trying to give yourself a sense of accountability when it comes to these themes for yourself personally, So, anyway, anytime I tell stories like this, I feel like all I'm doing is feels like I'm bragging. But this year, I joined a gym, and the gym is called Marietta Barbells. And literally, it's like some sort of subcultural kind of rocky gym where everybody is like Olympians. And then there's me. And all it is barbells. Like, it's not like, let's power walk and all this kind of stuff. It's barbells, people lifting weights. I've never lifted weights in my entire life. I didn't think it was necessary to lift weights at all. And so I decided I was going to do something, put myself into an environment that was different and where I can meet strangers.
I told some of my friends this, and they were afraid for his life.
Probably because I dropped the thing on my neck. And I got myself a personal trainer, and it has been fantastic, because I'm in this room full of people who, in high school, I would have never associated with these people. Like, these are the dumb jocks kind of thing in my brain, the stereotypes and stuff like that, who are looking at each other and looking at themselves in the mirror going, ooh, in the muscle shirts and stuff. But gosh, I talked to them, and one guy's a stunt guy, and the other guy wrote, and all of a sudden is sharing his paper that he wrote in college with me on this movie Smallfoot, which came out, this animated film that came out. And I go, oh, I know the writer of that. And so I sent my friend who's the writer of that movie his essay that he wrote in college, It just fun stuff, because you just put yourself in places that you normally wouldn't, right? And you can tell how buff I am. I mean, I just like killing it. I know.
But one of the things you mentioned that I thought was interesting, that I hope you can elaborate on a little bit more, is the main character representing America.
Yeah.
And when I thought about the movie Elvis, I kind of thought about the two main characters, the
Yeah.
manipulator, Captain, and Elvis being trapped.
Yes.
And I didn't know what part of
Which one?
which one is
Yeah.
the lead in America.
Yeah.
Are we all trapped, or are we being manipulated, or both?
Yes.
And how do you get out of that?
Yes.
I mean, of course, you're bringing God into this.
Yes.
So is God warning us to stay out of traps
Yes.
and be more open to setting boundaries?
Yes.
So those are the things that I would like for both of you to elaborate on a little bit more for me.
Yeah. Do you have anything you want to say initially?
Well, I mean, the first thing that comes to mind, and it's unfortunate because it's probably the thing that you would say, is, tech companies and algorithms and,
Yeah.
and even phones. And
That wasn't
all
what
that
I was
stuff.
thinking, actually, but go ahead.
Well, and I was also thinking about, the way that media and news stations.
That's what
and
I
that
was
sort of
thinking.
stuff- Yeah.
Yeah.
The way that kind of stuff manipulates us so much
Yeah.
and divides us. Yeah. And certainly, I wrote an essay recently about a lot of, and it's sort of related to the themes of the Oscars this year. It's something that you didn't touch on, but it was part of the themes that we didn't have time to touch on, was this idea of people fighting, and even a lot of the movies throughout the year, even that weren't nominated for Oscars, had this idea of brotherhood being broken, and brothers having to fight. And The Banshees of Inisherin, which is nominated, was about that. RRR, which is an amazing Indian film, is about that. Even Avatar has a lot of sort of brother conflict in it. And then I just saw the new Creed movie, Creed 3, which is very much like a brother from the past, metaphorical brother, who comes back and sort of wants to, bring up an old grudge, and they have to kind of fight as brothers. And I was thinking a lot about the way that we can be, maybe it's important to have those conflicts in order
Yeah.
to come out on the other side and be able to be, because in many of those movies they end up being brothers again.
Yeah.
And also realizing the things that are manipulating you. Like, I think in a lot of the movies with these brotherhood conflicts, there's a female character in a lot of the movies. In Banshees of Inisherin, there's a female character who kind of is this way, who's like the one clear-headed one. In Avatar, there's a sister who's kind of the clear-headed one who sees, in a lot of these movies, in Creed 3, there's a clear-headed person who sort of sees through the shallowness and silliness of the conflict.
Yeah. Priscilla and Elvis.
Priscilla and Elvis is able to do that. I remember specifically in Avatar 2, the brothers are fighting, and the sister goes, "This is so stupid!"
Yeah.
And I was like, that's how I feel when I watch the news. Like, it's like you're looking at the way that people are being manipulated to fight each other over things that maybe we should fight, and maybe there are valid, important things to have conflict over. But often we're fighting over stupid things and not the meaningful things that we should be having conflict over.
That's right.
And so I think about that as sort of how can we fight about the things that matter,
Yeah.
and come out on the other end with some real clarity, rather than fighting about stupid things that we're being manipulated into
Yeah.
fighting about, kind of like the Colonel in Elvis manipulating him.
Yeah, I think your question, VJ, is so good because that's the way metaphor and imagery should work in our brains. Like we should immediately go, okay, what is the Colonel in my life, right? Like, what is the Colonel in America? Like, is it our news outlets, like we were talking about, or is it our tech companies that have ownership over us, and we need to leave them, or we need to leave this certain network, or whatever? Like, you could say that, like putting ourselves, in that, but also then bringing it down to the personal level. What is the, like we were talking about, personifying your phone as the Colonel, and you as Elvis, all of a sudden that becomes, more real. So I think it's a great question, because usually I do, especially with two characters, I'm always seeing that that's pretty much, like you said, both. There's something in there that is something in America that we're dealing with, and some other side of America that we're dealing with, So
I'm Janet Roden, and I was just thinking throughout this whole time how art reflects life.
yes,
But this concept is more like art predicts life.
that's right, yeah.
But, and I don't know where I'm going with that, but I'm just thinking about that prediction of life. Also, and there was another thing, and I don't know if these are connected or not, but was just going through my mind, is is thinking about the younger generation being the change agent.
Yeah.
And then one thing I've just been concerned about since COVID has been how we have a whole generation of young people who have no concept of community connection
Yes.
and what's the future going to be like for them.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking from little ones who were born during COVID who've never
Right.
met strangers, and then also with teenagers when you
Yes.
brought up Tim Elmore, like how is this inability to even talk to someone
Yes.
or relate to someone, really I'm thinking like what's God up to and what's going to happen.
Yeah,
and
that's
I don't
why
know
I
if
s-
anybody else is thinking about that.
Yeah, Janet, I think you're so spot on. Like, I think that's why this is so timely right now, right? Like, that's why I believe God's in this kind of breaking through barriers and saying, do this now, because now we need to do this because of what you're saying, right? My daughter went to spend her freshman year this year at university, which I won't name. But anyway, she went there and she felt so isolated. And she kept telling us, I can't find anybody who will have a meaningful conversation with us. And of course she was saying people are on their phones and all that kind of stuff. Like she was saying that. But you could just hear her heart cry. And she is one of the people you're talking about. You know, like she was graduating high school and all this kind of stuff with COVID being a part of it. And so the funny thing is that she had a friend who was in the music department with her, sharing her same major. And her friend was downstairs from her, like literally one flight down in her dorm. And I said, why don't you go downstairs and like knock on her door and see what she's doing? And she goes, Dad, that's so weird. And I don't know if you were like me, Janet, in high school or in college, where we were like hanging out at each other's dorm rooms all the time. Like we were sitting there playing, like Monopoly all night long or something like that. And we would just go, like we were always like in each other's dorm rooms, hanging out and stuff. And I feel so much for that isolation that we're talking about, and how, like Shaylin said, I feel like she said it's the skill set, like that's been lost. Like it's the older generation who has to teach the younger generation how to bring back that skill set of interpersonal skills, right? And so I think you're just spot on that there is a generation that we're going to, that hopefully they're going to be change agents, but I do think they're the shrapnel of a lot of stuff, or they're the shrapnel of, they've been dealing with the shrapnel of our divisiveness, and they've been dealing with the shrapnel of this huge pandemic,
So I had a question that I didn't see like 5 of the movies that are nominated for Oscar, but we just rewatched RRR. Again, it's a story about basically 2 heroes. Basically, there's a little girl who's being kidnapped, and then the rest of the story is about trying to save her. And I thought about this theme of saving our children, or being committed to the younger generation. Even in Top Gun Maverick and
Yes.
Avatar, maybe Elvis and Fablemans are like not as good example of that. And if you, because you've seen all the other movies, you have anything to say about how healing or like something not so good between like intergenerational relationship within the fighting of the family, or potential healing of the family, could be essential to empower the younger generation to bring some transformation?
Such a good question. In fact, we had to cut that from the program. We were doing a whole thing of cross-generational conflict in the movies. And the thing that's really great, you see it at the last clip that we showed with Top Gun Maverick, is, you see it at the beginning when they're fighting. Maverick says, I saved you, and Rooster says, no, I saved you, that kind of thing. And then you see it in Avatar too, where the children are saving the parents, which doesn't happen in movies that often, where the children are saving the parents, but the parents are also saving the children too. Lesser degree, I think, in these movies, the parents are, I would say some movies is different, but with those 2 movies specifically, you're seeing the younger generation actually saving the lives of the older generation. So I think there's something there, but I do think the whole saving each other is important in the movies. Like you said, there's other movies. Fablemans is a great example where, it's complicated, because the child is responsible for things that they shouldn't be responsible for. Like the mother is giving her secrets away and saying, don't say it, don't tell anything about this. And so the child's having to be an adult when he shouldn't have to be an adult, you know?
All Quiet on the Western Front is
Totally, right? All Quiet on the Western Front is a naive child coming into war, and all the powers that be are manipulating and treating this boy as if he's just a pawn in their power struggle. And he's becoming literally the casualty of the war between older generations, you know? I asked Tim about this. That was one of the questions I asked him was, you know, are our younger generation an actual, you know, casualty of our wars? And he was like, oh, totally. He said, the only thing that's good about it is he says he looks at, that the younger generation looks at us arguing and all the divisiveness, and his hope is that they'll go, I don't want to be you. And so they won't be like that when they grow up. That's his hope, is that they'll learn from us, not in a bad way, but in a like, I don't want to be you, in the way that you guys are just sitting there arguing all the time, or the way that you have caused me to be a casualty in your wars, you know. Does that make sense? Is that your question, though?
I think so. I think like the follow-up question would be something like if he maybe talk about or you thought about the ways how to create some kind of language or environments where these things, like we can bond more together within our families or within our communities, or
Yeah.
I don't know.
It's so funny because I'm a movie guy. I'm not I'm not a therapist, but I do think, you know, like I'm trying to be as action oriented as possible with these movies or with the Oscar themes as possible. And yet I don't know what the answer to that is, right? I can't be prescriptive and going, okay, well, what we need to do is just like do this, you know, whatever it is that's prescriptive to generational. What would you do? Debbie, you're smart enough.
I just, the idea of strangers crossed my mind, that it doesn't have to be a stranger on the street, but even like within my family, someone who I feel like a stranger to.
Yeah.
Especially like, yeah, when I do feel that was probably always like part of our lives in human history, that there's always like deep abyss between me and the next generation, or yeah, so.
I mean, my answer would be the church. Like, I think the church should be that place where you're able to meet strangers and meet people who are different than you and meet people who are from a different generation than you. You know,
Yeah.
I think sometimes we've made mistakes in being like, oh, here's the middle schoolers are here and the high schoolers are here and the old people are here and none of them interact.
Yeah.
And they're not supposed to interact, and you stay with your age group. That's a very American thing to do.
Yeah.
And then even, you know, the fact that so many church communities kind of can become echo chambers of like, because we all drive to our churches rather than being churches in our immediate community, it means that the people who drive there all have shared preferences and shared ideology and shared sort of sense of this is what church should be.
Yeah.
So we don't meet people who are different than us as much as we should. And so that's what I always strive for and hope for, is like being part of a church where different generations of people interact and where different types of people interact. And I think that's, you know, should be a gathering place for that kind of community.
I know in business, if you could, I know Janet, you would probably say this, that, you know, as a team leader, this is your reality. Like all of a sudden you're getting all these Gen Zers coming in and you're having to figure out cross-generational conflict and values. And, you know, here's a person saying, well, I don't want your work if I have to do this or this and this and this, you know. And so I do think it's working itself out really extremely in business world, where the cross-generational thing is happening, where that has to be solved or else you can't be productive, you know. But in other worlds, I don't think we tend, like when I look at my son, I don't go, oh, we have such a different, you know, like we have a conflict because we're different generations. And part of it's because I have a good relationship with my son, but I need to think that way. I need to think that there is still bridges that we have to cross together to figure out a cross-generational strangeness to each other, if that makes sense. Yeah.
So when you guys were talking about the multiverse, it made me think about how every single person we meet has a different perception of us because of their own worldview. And I'm curious if you think that social media makes that feel bigger or even more true.
We'll let you answer that one.
Yeah, I think definitely. Like, I said it before, but I think there is a sense in which, because we can find these sort of niche communities on the internet, which are so empowering and so awesome, like to find people who are like you, it can also be a temptation to be surrounded by people who are only like you and sort of live in that universe, you know? And so I've had moments where I like look at my timeline, you know, on Twitter or Instagram or something, and I go, oh yeah, all the people are agreeing on this. And then all of a sudden someone else will show me their timeline, and it's like the total opposite opinion is filled on their time, and everyone's saying the exact opposite thing. And I'm like, maybe reality is not as concrete as I thought it was, and that can be scary. And it is like, I don't know, like sometimes it makes me question, like maybe, I think within me there's sort of a desire to feel like I know, oh, this is what the majority of people are thinking, or this is what the masses are thinking, or this is what everyone is thinking. But maybe sometimes all that matters is just to know like what the people in your immediate actual community and vicinity in real life think about something. Like, and it's important to have other perspectives, but like, it's certainly, I mean,
That
it's the
stranger,
thinking the we
yeah.
thing. Like, it certainly gives you something that you can actually process and deal with and grasp, rather than the infinite, you know, range of experience that people have.
That was the thing with the book of Powers of Strangers, was that when you talk to a stranger, you're going to get a different perspective on life, right? And it's going to it's going to take you out of that echo chamber, and it's going to broaden your sense of humanity, right? In a good way. And it's going to bring that multiverse into reality, that there is a different universe that this person lives in, but I think what it does is it blends it together, right? It brings it together so that you feel like you're a part of a bigger humanity in that sense. But you know what's so funny when you say that, Victoria, is have you ever like been on like Facebook, or for me it's Facebook, probably for you it's Instagram or whatever, but have you ever been on there and gone, what does everyone else's feed look like right now? I don't know if this is more existential me kind of thing, but you know, I'm sitting here going, well, here's the people coming up in my feed. Like, do I come up in their feed? Or what does their feed look like? Because they've got all kinds of other relationships with other people, you know, and then you think, oh, well, that's just one person. And they've got other, I mean, it's just like mind blown, multiverse kind of thing. So.
Right, yeah. And getting people's feedback when you don't think that you show up on their feed, and all of a sudden they're like, you haven't posted in a while. What's been going on? I keep up with you that way.
Yeah.
I didn't even know I was on your radar. You think my life is this, but I think it's this.
Right.
It's really fascinating.
It is.
To live in a sort of multiverse without even necessarily realizing it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny how it, like, social media in so many ways, it like allows us to exist in the same universe in some ways, because it's like we're able to all react to the same things together and like experience world events and media and all these different things together, and yet also it splits things. And I think part of it is like, I've sometimes called it like a multiverse of choice, like where I think we just live in such a world, especially in America, of like infinite choices, so many choices of what, you know, you can have a dating app that gives you infinite choices of people to date, and yet dating is still harder than ever right now for so many people. And people say it's so much more difficult than it was when your dating pool was actually much smaller, you know?
Yeah.
And so for me, I think actually sometimes limitation and getting rid of choice, like just dealing with the choices in front of you, can be helpful, as well as like, I don't know, shared rituals, I think, are really important. And I think because of so many choices, we all go in our separate directions. I mean, it sort of plays into what I said about movie theaters. We all sort of go and do our own thing and choose to experience things the way that we want. We stream something whenever we want, or we go on the dating app that we want and meet people that way. And that sort of removes the idea of a shared ritual that we all experience together, because that's the one local parish church that we have, or that's the one local movie theater, and it's showing the movie once today, you know?
Yeah.
I think about like midnight premieres movies that have kind of died off. Like, it used to be on Thursday nights, you'd have a midnight premiere of a movie, and that was the one time it would show before then it opens on Friday. And now there's like 10 showtimes of the same movie on Thursdays, and they usually start at 3 p.m. for some reason. And I go, that's the sort of multiverse of choice.
Yeah.
Meaning we all go to different showtimes, and there's not that common shared ritual of a gathering of a midnight premiere that there used to be.
Yeah.
And I don't quite know how I can link that to social media, but I think rituals are important, and choices can also, the amount of choices can create that idea of fractured reality. Yeah.
Yeah. one of the things that Tim said that was really mind-blowing to me is he was talking about, and I don't know if this plays into what you're saying as far as choices, but he was saying that in life we have so much things prescribed to us, like so that we don't have to think, and he was talking about even parents, like they've outlined a child's life, and this is when we're going to do this, and so children are growing up with their parents, having a prescription for their lives, right? And then he said what happens is like even with Netflix. Netflix says, because you watch this, you should watch this, and it's prescribing our choices for us. And so, his recommendation is we have to get in a more descriptive mode, meaning that we have to find that shared spaces where we're wrestling with conflict, where we're talking about things, where we're going into the complicated aspects of things so that we can hash out and wrestle with each other. So I do think there's a stage of having to think again, like we need to think again. Like that's one of the things that bothers me about the Oscars and how people have dismissed the Oscars is because they really want something prescriptive that tells them what to think from the standpoint of like just an entertaining movie, right? But when they have to think and watch Banshees of Inisherin and go, okay, I need to talk about, like that requires you to take that agency and that initiative to think again. And I think that a lot of these things that we are faced with in life do that prescription, and so we have to be more active in like he said, being descriptive, which means that we have to work together, think together, fight together, converse together, and fight in a good way, fight with love, in a way that even goes beyond breaking through barriers, but actually finding ways to kind of finally talk about these things, if that makes sense. I don't know. I feel like I'm rambling now. Thank you for staying this long, and thank you for coming today and just being a part of this. We really enjoyed. Hopefully you've thought a lot. I think probably a lot of this is just like, boof. It is for us too, as far as thinking through all this. But thank you for your faces out here, and thank you for just
Being present.
Being present and having proximity with us. Yeah, so it's good. Thank you guys. Appreciate it.